Good morning, Alex and friends. I'm Grace. Today is Thursday, July 16th, 2026, and you're listening to Alex's News. The weather in Riverside is expected to be quite warm today, with a high of 95.4 degrees and a low of 71.2 degrees. It looks like a hot one out there, so please remember to take the necessary precautions to stay cool and hydrated if you find yourself spending time outside. On today's show, we are taking a closer look at the reasons behind the rising tensions between the United States and Iran. We will also explore the ongoing discussions in California regarding the legislative efforts of the Compete Act. Beyond these main topics, we have a variety of other important headlines to get to today. All this and more coming up on Alex's News. Stay tuned. Good morning. The U.S.-Iran conflict has taken a sharp new turn, and it's now sparking a fight over presidential war powers. Our reporter Ethan has been tracking this closely. Ethan, we covered this last week. What's changed since then?
Good morning, Grace. You may remember we reported on those airstrikes and the naval blockade last Wednesday. Well, the big development is that on July 10th, the White House formally notified Congress of renewed military action. According to ABC News and Good Morning America, the administration says these new hostilities actually started on July 7th. And that notification has kicked off a serious legal battle here at home.
A legal battle? Walk me through what's actually in dispute.
So this all centers on the War Powers Act of 1973. That law generally gives a president 60 days to conduct military operations before needing approval from Congress. Many Democrats argue the Trump administration blew past that 60-day limit a while ago. The whole conflict began back on February 28th, so by their math, the clock ran out months ago.
And how is the White House responding to that argument?
This is where it gets interesting. The administration is essentially arguing for a clock reset. According to a LinkedIn post detailing their reasoning, they say the July 10th notice began a brand new 60-day period. They're characterizing the July 7th events as the start of a completely separate military action. The claim is that the original conflict legally ended during a ceasefire, so what's happening now is a fresh engagement, not a continuation.
Does everyone in Washington buy that reasoning?
Not necessarily. ABC News noted it remains unclear whether Republicans will formally back this clock reset theory. It's a novel legal argument, and it could set a real precedent for how future presidents interpret their war powers. The letter itself was addressed to Senate President pro tempore Charles Grassley, Republican of Iowa. The White House also stressed that no U.S. ground forces are involved in these operations.
What did the administration say about how these strikes are being conducted?
The White House was careful with its language. They described the strikes as, quote, limited, measured, planned, and executed in a manner designed to minimize civilian casualties, end quote. That framing matters because it feeds directly into their legal position that this is a contained action, not an open-ended war. Of course, critics see it very differently, given the scale of what's happened since late February.
Let's talk about the military side. What are we seeing on the ground, or rather, from the air?
By July 16th, U.S. Central Command, which is CENTCOM, reported completing a recent wave of precision strikes. According to Good Morning America, these hit Iranian command centers, air defense sites, missile and drone capabilities, and coastal surveillance facilities. That includes targets in Bandar Abbas. And just yesterday morning, on July 15th, U.S. forces struck cruise missile and coastal defense sites on Greater Tunb Island.
That's a lot of targets. Is there anything the president is signaling he wants to hit next?
There is, and it's significant. President Trump has expressed intent to, quote, take out, end quote, a site called Pickaxe Mountain. Analysts believe that location is linked to Iran's nuclear program, so that would be a major escalation if it happens. For now, it's a stated intention, not an accomplished strike. But it tells you the administration is keeping nuclear-related sites squarely on the table.
And how is Iran responding to all of this?
Iran continues to fire back. Jordan state media reported that Jordanian armed forces intercepted 8 Iranian missiles on Thursday morning. The good news there is that no casualties or damage were reported. It's a reminder that this conflict keeps spilling over onto neighbors in the region, not just the two main combatants. That regional dimension has been one of the most dangerous parts of this whole crisis.
Now, the Strait of Hormuz has been the flashpoint from the start. What's the latest there?
The strait is still the primary flashpoint, Grace. CENTCOM announced that the U.S. resumed its naval blockade of Iranian ports on July 14th at 4 p.m. Eastern. They're targeting maritime traffic moving in and out of Iranian coastal areas. CENTCOM says 2 compliant vessels were simply redirected without incident, but there was one dramatic confrontation.
What happened with that one?
A tanker called the M/T Belma, which is Curacao flagged, ignored repeated warnings while trying to reach Karg Island. In response, U.S. aircraft fired Hellfire missiles and disabled the vessel. So this blockade clearly has teeth. It's not just a symbolic line on a map. Ships that don't comply are facing real force, and that raises the stakes for every commercial operator in the region.
Last week, we mentioned that controversial 20% shipping fee. Where does that stand now?
That's a notable reversal. President Trump had initially announced the U.S. would act as the, quote, guardian, end quote, of the strait and charge a 20% fee on all cargo shipped through the region. Iran pushed back hard. IRGC spokesman Ibrahim Zolfikari said Iran would, quote, deal forcefully, end quote, with any disruption to commercial shipping. And Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi said the 20% fee was, quote, too much, end quote.
So did the administration back down on that fee?
Essentially, yes. According to reports from CBS News and El País, that 20% United States reimbursement fee is no longer in effect. On July 14th, President Trump announced he'd replace it with, quote, trade and investment deals, end quote, to be made by various Gulf states into the United States. He cited backlash from the shipping industry and what he called productive conversations with Middle East leadership. So it's a pivot from a toll to broader economic arrangements.
Amid all this tension, has there been any sign of diplomacy at all?
There has been at least one gesture. President Trump announced via social media that Iran released Dina Karari. She's a U.S. Iranian citizen and nonprofit leader who'd been detained since December 2024 on charges of espionage. Trump described her release as a, quote, gesture of goodwill, end quote. It's a small bright spot in an otherwise very tense situation, and it suggests some back-channel communication is still happening.
And finally, how is all of this hitting the economy and people's wallets?
The economic impact has been immediate, Grace. As of July 13th, oil prices spiked more than 9%. U.S. oil is selling at roughly $78 a barrel, and global oil has reached about $83 a barrel. When a critical shipping corridor like the Strait of Hormuz is under threat, energy markets react fast. So even people far from the conflict are feeling it, especially anytime they fill up at the pump.
So where does this leave us heading into the rest of the week?
The big thing to watch is that war powers question. If Republicans don't embrace the clock reset theory, this could become a real constitutional showdown between Congress and the White House. Militarily, all eyes are on whether Pickaxe Mountain becomes a target. And economically, those oil prices will tell us a lot about how markets expect this to unfold. It's a fast-moving story, and we'll keep tracking every turn.
We appreciate it. That's Ethan with the latest on the U.S.-Iran conflict. Thanks so much, Ethan.
Thanks for having me, Grace.
Welcome back. This morning we're digging into a fight brewing in California's capital over competition, prices, and who gets to sue big companies. It's a bill called the Compete Act, and it's dividing even Democrats. Here to explain is our reporter, Chloe. Chloe, good morning. What exactly does this bill do?
Good morning, Grace. So the Compete Act is officially known as Assembly Bill 1776, and it aims to dramatically expand California's antitrust laws. According to reporting from CalMatters, KPBS, and LAist, the heart of it is something called a private right of action. That would let individuals and businesses who feel harmed by a single company's attempts to stifle competition go straight to state court and sue. It's a real shift from how things work now.
How does the law work now, before this bill?
Right now in California, these kinds of lawsuits are typically only allowed when two or more parties are suspected of conspiring together to smother their competitors. So it takes a partnership, essentially, a plot between companies. What this bill does is open the door to going after just one company acting alone. Supporters say that's a crucial gap, because a single dominant firm can do plenty of damage on its own without needing a co-conspirator.
And why do supporters say California needs to act on its own here?
Their argument is that federal antitrust laws have been, in their words, watered down by federal courts over the years. So proponents believe the state needs its own distinct approach, one that specifically allows for single-party enforcement. The bill's author is Democratic Assembly Majority Leader Cecilia Aguiar Curry, who represents the Davis area. She's been making the case that consolidation has gotten out of hand across the American economy.
What kind of numbers is she pointing to?
She told the Senate Judiciary Committee that more than 75% of U.S. industries have undergone consolidation since the late 1990s. That's a striking figure. Aguiar Curry argues that when companies abuse that concentrated power, it leads to higher prices, suppressed wages for working families, fewer choices for consumers, and a tougher climate for new small business owners trying to create jobs. So she frames this as protecting everyday Californians.
Can you give us some concrete examples of what supporters think this would fix?
Sure. Proponents point to a few specific benefits. One is consumer protection, giving people a legal tool to help keep independent grocery stores and pharmacies open. Another is supply chain integrity, preventing a single firm from dominating the supply chains that farms and restaurants depend on. And a third is healthcare access, increasing the variety of options for patients seeking medical care. So they're painting a picture that touches groceries, farming, and doctors.
Who else is lining up behind the bill?
One notable voice is Lee Hepner, senior legal counsel at the American Economic Liberties Project. He calls a private right of action a, quote, critical backstop, end quote, against the politicization of antitrust enforcement. His point is that without it, wealthy corporations can use lobbying and political influence to pressure regulators into simply looking the other way. So he sees citizen lawsuits as insurance against enforcement getting captured by money.
And I understand labor unions are involved too. What's their angle?
That's right. Mark Ramos, president of the United Food and Commercial Workers Western States Council, argues the bill is necessary so consolidation doesn't drive down wages or push up the price of goods. He notes that grocery mergers in particular have made it harder for workers to bargain for living wages. When there are fewer employers, workers have less leverage. So for the unions, this is really about paychecks and bargaining power.
Now, this bill clearly has strong opponents. Who's fighting it?
The opposition is fierce, and it's coming mainly from California's tech and business industries. Business groups, including the California Chamber of Commerce, which people call Cal Chamber, argue the bill would create what they describe as unprecedented and massive legal liability. They warn it would spawn a, quote, cottage industry, end quote, of predatory law firms and activists. Those groups, they say, would file suits over consumer privacy, labor complaints, and disability access just to shake down companies for cash.
Is there a legal expert making that case against the bill?
Yes, Babette Bolik, a law professor at Pepperdine University and a former chief economist for the FCC, has criticized the bill's language as too vague. She likened the legislation to a, quote, speed limit that no one knows exists, end quote. Her worry is that such ambiguity would let judges pick, in her words, winners and losers, based on subjective sympathies rather than measurable economic harm. So the concern is unpredictability for businesses trying to follow the rules.
This fight has spilled into public view, hasn't it?
It really has, and in a pretty personal way. Cal Chamber lobbyists placed billboards near the Capitol that target Aguiar Curry by name. The billboards read, quote, Cecilia, prices are high enough already, end quote, urging her not to make life more expensive for consumers. So this isn't just a quiet policy debate happening in committee rooms. Both sides are taking it to the streets, and the author is feeling direct heat.
You mentioned this divides Democrats. Where does the bill stand right now?
It's had a bumpy but forward path. The bill passed the Assembly but narrowly, with 15 Democrats choosing not to vote at all. Then it was advanced by the Senate Judiciary Committee on a 9-2 vote. Still, some moderate Democrats remain skeptical, so this isn't a clean party line story. There's real friction within the majority party over how far to go.
Who's the most prominent skeptic among the Democrats?
That would be Senator Tom Umberg, the Democratic chairperson of the Judiciary Committee. Umberg argues the authority to sue should be limited to the California Attorney General and local prosecutors. His concern is about, quote, stifling competition by virtue of the threat of lawsuits, end quote. In other words, he worries that even the fear of being sued could scare companies away from competing. So he wants government enforcers in that role, not private citizens.
Has the author made any changes to win him over?
She has, to a point. Curry has agreed to incorporate most of Umberg's requested changes, and she's working to make it harder to bring what she calls meritless suits. But here's the sticking point. She has not committed to removing the private right of action for citizens and businesses, which is really the core of the bill. So the two sides have narrowed their differences, but the central disagreement is still alive.
Has she tried to protect smaller businesses caught in the middle?
Yes, she added an exemption aimed at small, independently owned California businesses. To qualify, a business must have no more than 100 employees and have averaged $10 million or more in gross annual receipts over the previous 3 years. The idea is to shield the little guys from costly litigation. But not everyone's convinced that carve-out goes far enough to matter.
What do the critics say about that exemption?
Ben Golombek, executive vice president at Cal Chamber, warns that thousands of businesses across all sizes remain vulnerable to costly litigation despite the exemption. So from his perspective, the carve-out doesn't solve the underlying problem. The business community still sees a broad exposure to lawsuits, and they argue that uncertainty alone could chill investment in hiring. It's a reminder that a partial fix rarely satisfies determined opponents.
There's also a lot of money swirling around this, right?
A staggering amount. According to CalMatters' digital democracy database, the two opposing factions have poured serious cash into campaigns. On one side, you've got trial lawyers and labor unions, and on the other, the tech and business industries. Together, they've contributed at least $106 million to lawmakers' campaigns since the year 2000. So the political stakes here go well beyond a single vote.
So what happens next? And when?
The Compete Act is scheduled to be heard by the Senate Appropriations Committee in early August. That's coming up after lawmakers return from their summer recess, so just a few weeks from now. That hearing will be the next big test. Expect both sides to keep up the pressure, and watch whether Curry and Umberg can bridge that gap over the private right of action.
Fascinating fight to keep an eye on. Chloe, thank you so much for breaking it all down for us this morning.
My pleasure, Grace. I'll be watching that August hearing closely.
We'll have you back when it happens. That's going to do it for us today. Thanks for waking up with us, and we'll see you tomorrow morning. Here are some other headlines. Coming up, a shocking new report from the ACLU is putting the spotlight on ICE, and it seems things are getting a bit too physical. The report, released July 16, 2026, claims that use of force has become the default tool for officers since President Trump returned to office. It sounds like they are really putting their foot down, as researchers documented over 400 instances of people being pushed, tackled, or pinned to the ground. To add fuel to the fire, weapons like tasers, rubber bullets, and chemical irritants were used just as frequently. Most alarmingly, dozens of encounters involved deadly tactics, including chokeholds and knees to the neck. This crackdown isn't just staying in the shadows. It has spilled over into the streets, affecting journalists, protesters, citizens, and even children at grocery stores and bus stops. Naureen Shah of the ACLU says this culture of abuse is being funded by tens of billions of dollars in federal cash, leaving officers under pressure to hit unprecedented arrest quotas. When asked for a comment, the Department of Homeland Security and ICE decided to give the cold shoulder, offering no response at all. Turning our attention south of the border, Venezuela is currently shaking things up in the worst way possible. The nation is reeling from twin earthquakes that claimed thousands of lives. While the country tries to pick up the pieces, the fight for a return to democracy has been pushed to the back burner. It seems the political landscape has shifted, as the government prioritizes disaster recovery, leaving the democratic process in a state of suspension. It is a heartbreaking reminder that when the earth moves, political progress often comes to a grinding halt. And finally, we have a quick update on the legal beat. There is an Attorney General confirmation hearing on the horizon, though we are still waiting for the full details to be etched in stone. We will be keeping a close eye on the proceedings to see who will be steering the ship at the Department of Justice. That is all for our quick look at the morning's news. Stay tuned for your local weather and traffic updates coming up next. That's all we have for now. Today's episode was made by Alexander King with Claude Opus 4.8, Gemini Pro 3.1, Gemini Flash 3, and Google Cloud Text-to-Speech. I hope you have a great day. I'll see you tomorrow, Alex.